We would so much rather do special needs. It's hard, but to us, it would be so much easier than having another child die.
Hello, you're listening to The Rare Life. I'm your host, Madeline Cheney, and today I have for you episode 27, The Story of Gilbert. Gilbert is 1 year old and sustained brain bleeds in utero, causing birth defects like low vision, seizures, and intellectual disabilities. In this episode, Mom Anna shares a bit about Ghillie, his birth and NICU experience, and positive ways to approach others with differences. Like a lot of us, Anna has been through some really hard situations that she shares in this episode and the next in her special topic episode. Now, as a little reminder, if you want to support this podcast and your well-being, I invite you to consider receiving online therapy through our sponsor, BetterHelp, where you are matched with a counselor that fits your specific needs. I love the affordability and the convenience of this service, especially for those of us for whom it is impossible to get out the door to traditional counseling. If this speaks to you, there is a link in the show notes for more information. I discovered Anna through Instagram. I have been following her for some time, and I love her raw and honest pieces that she writes. She's a great writer. She has this ability to articulate these really complex and hard emotions and experiences. And so many times she's nailed something right on the head that I've been grappling with and didn't have the words for. I have very few Instagrammers that I follow religiously, and Anna is one of them because I just really love reading what she writes. You can give her a follow at Anna Margaret's. I'll put a link in the show notes for that. So a little bit about their family. Anna's husband, Mark, is an active duty Navy and has been for 10 years. They live with their family in Rochester, Minnesota. Their oldest is Jack, and he is 6 years old, and Anna describes him as the caregiver. Lillian is 4 years old, and she died at 35 weeks gestation, leaving their family totally heartbroken and continuously grieving. Lawrence is 2 years old and their little firecracker. And last comes their little surprise, Gilbert, who we also refer to as Ghillie, who is 1 year old, their wayfinder, and whom this episode is all about. Anna is a lover of alternative rock music and chai tea lattes. She claims she could drink them every day for the rest of her life. Let's jump into our conversation. Hi, Anna. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Madeline, how are you?
Great. I'm so excited to chat about life.
Yes, us too. Thank you for having us on. We're super excited to share a little bit of our story.
Yeah. So let's start out with a little snapshot of where Ghillie is right now, a little bit about who he is and his current age, which I realize, will be outdated by the time this is released, but his current age now.
Yes. So Ghillie is 1 year old, and on July 14th, he'll be celebrating kind of his 1 year corrected age, just since he was born almost 4 months premature. So he's technically only about 11 months old right now, or is supposed to be developmentally. Obviously, he's kind of behind in that for other reasons. But right now, the big things that he's doing in his life, a lot of his therapies were targeting towards increasing his comfort day to day and kind of dealing with the muscle spasticity that he has due to cerebral palsy. And then we're also really hard charging his vision therapies since he has a cortical visual impairment. So that means that his eyes are normal and intact and able to see and take in information, but his brain just can't process it. So that's kind of our big thing right now, is working on the vision stuff.
Right. And that's CVI, right? When you said that, I was like, I've
Yeah,
never heard of that. But like Kimball has CVI too, so I should have
yes,
recognized the
yeah,
full
that's
official name.
CVI.
Okay. And I noticed that you've talked about on Instagram about how his vision loss is a really big deal, right? Like that's one of his main concerns that you guys have to deal with.
Yeah, that's a big thing for him. It's played a huge role in his loss of interest in oral eating, and then it also just doesn't give him, I guess, any incentive or motivation with lifting his head up or rolling or even reaching for objects, just because he doesn't quite realize that they're there.
Right. And that has been degenerative, right?
Yeah, so it's not technically a progressive thing,
Okay.
but kind of as his brain injury has evolved, we've seen it come out a little bit more and play a bigger role in things, just kind of as everything's evolved with his brain. And that was one of the things that the doctors explained to us from the beginning when they first told us about his brain bleeds, is that, he's going to seem fine at first, but then as skills typically move upward in the brain throughout a child's development, you're going to see his skills slow down and even stop, just because that brain tissue is no longer there.
Interesting. Do they have any kind of projection of what his life might be, or any
Um,
kind of idea?
yeah, it's really hard to say because there's just such a huge spectrum of how this can play out. Obviously, since his bleeds were grade 3 and 4, which are the most severe, that changes his prognosis a lot. It seems, what we've heard the most from doctors, and also just in our own research that we've been doing, is that it'll play a huge role on neuromotor skills and also vision, seizures, which he already has. So it kind of affects everything, but there's no way of knowing what it's ultimately going to look like.
Okay. Wow. So what about Gilly as a person? What kind of
Yes.
personality have you seen in him?
He is, for the most part, one of the happiest people that I know.
Oh,
He truly is the type that just loves, like, life's little or simple pleasures is always what I say. He's most content sitting in his chair in front of a window or outside because he can perceive the light so well. So I think that's something he really enjoys. He loves when the TV is on, obviously, because that's another light source. He loves playing with his brothers. That's one of his favorite times of the day, is when his brothers come downstairs after they've woken up and come say hello to him in the morning. He just lights up, and he's usually laughing and smiling. If I describe his personality in one word, I would probably say joyful.
oh, that's so sweet. What a blessing. Like that he would be more
Yes.
content because, he has to handle a lot.
Hmm.
I think that's really neat.
Yeah, he's been through a lot in his little life.
Yeah. And that reminds me too. Does he have a hearing loss?
Yeah, he has hearing loss in his right ear.
Okay.
We're not sure if it's a result of his brain injury. I'm a carrier for genetic hearing loss. My sister has hearing loss in both of her ears and wears hearing aids, and she's had those since she was 3 years old. So at this point, they're
Interesting.
not sure if it's, since it's just on one side, is that related to his brain injury, or is it this genetic stuff?
Interesting. So does he respond to sound pretty well? Like with his
He,
hearing aid?
yeah, yeah, with his hearing aid, we notice a huge difference in his personality. He just seems kind of more attuned with what's going on. He can still hear pretty well without it, though. And at the appointment where he got his hearing aids, they were able to use the computer to simulate what his hearing is like, so that
Oh,
Mark
wow.
and I were able to hear it. And that's ultimately what pushed us towards getting him hearing aids, was just hearing how, even though it is a mild hearing loss and it's only in one ear, it is still a pretty noticeable difference.
Interesting. That's cool. I've always wondered what it sounds like. I need to ask Kimball's audiologist for that.
Yes, you should.
That
It's
sounds really
really
cool.
neat. Yeah.
Yeah. We listened to like the Flintstones simulation. Have you there's a YouTube video.
No, I haven't seen that one.
Oh, okay. Well, it just shows like different levels of hearing loss, and it progressively gets more and more muffled. And it only took
Yeah.
one time of watching that video, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm gonna put his hearing aids in way more often," because it was, it's one more thing.
Yeah.
So I wasn't doing
Hmm.
it very often, but like after I saw that, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm convinced. Like I'm a believer.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put those in."
It's crazy. For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. I know we have to kind of limit it, just with his 2-year-old brother running around, likes to grab the hearing aid if it falls
Oh
out.
no.
And, kind of like, that's a That equipment's a little bit expensive. I don't really want you playing with that, buddy.
Yeah, totally. Then you have like the little ear molds that pop off and the
Yeah.
battery and the
Oh,
hearing aid.
yeah.
Yeah. So going back just a little bit too, because of vision loss, how do you handle that? How does that affect you as a parent?
Yeah, that's, I can't pick what the hardest aspect is of all the ways his injury manifests itself, but that's for sure one of the bigger things for us is just that loss of visual connection that you don't really realize how important it is until it's not there. A few months ago, I had the opportunity to meet my cousin's little girl through the window since it was still times of Corona.
Hmm.
And I was just completely shocked by the fact that this little baby was able to make eye contact and track my movements and smile back at me while maintaining eye contact. Because just for months and months, I was used to not having that. So it really took me by surprise like, oh, yeah, that's how babies are supposed to look at you. And that, as a diagnosis, that one was really surprising to us too, because it was one of the things that they hadn't given us as a possibility. No one told us that vision loss could be an issue for him. And it wasn't until I was scrolling through Instagram and saw another mom's post about it, the video of her son and the way she described him. I was like, that is a lot like Gilbert. I wonder if he has this. So it
Wow.
was actually us who approached the doctors about it. His primary care doctor at the time was like, yeah, we should probably have a special MRI done just to assess the visual centers in his brain and get this confirmed because that is probably what it is.
Wow. That's
Mm-hmm.
amazing. I think it's so cool when, as a parent, you have an active role in finding things like
Yeah.
that and like asking the right questions because they're really good at what they do. But, you have that extra, I don't know, I believe in like the parental instinct where,
Oh, for sure.
you can catch on to that.
Yeah. Yeah. A doctor might see them for 20 or 30 minutes, but we do it 24/7,
Yeah.
basically. So I always say nobody knows your baby like you do.
Yeah. Yeah. Was that hard interacting with the baby you
Um,
met? Was that difficult for you to like to see her
it
tracking you and
was,
stuff like that?
yeah, it definitely, it made me sad. Obviously I'm still happy for her and I'm super excited that her baby is here.
Mhm.
At the same time though, just it really highlighted one of the big things that we're missing in our life with Gilbert,
Yeah.
which is always, hard to, I guess, be confronted by that reality.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm kind of reminded of what it could be like or should be like,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So, I kind of want to go back in time to when you first found out that he had,
Yeah.
issues.
Uh, so, obviously it would kind of tie into Lillian a little bit too, just
Yeah.
with the fact that I went to the hospital originally for decreased movements for him, which was the same as Lillian. And the first time I went to the hospital was 24 weeks and 6 days pregnant. They put me on the monitor there and he perked up almost right away. So I stayed there and was monitored for about 4 hours. And they said, if you feel comfortable going home, you can just please come back if he goes back to not moving or if his movements change again. So I went home that night. The boys had made pudding with my mom that day. So it's like 10 o'clock. I got home. I was a pregnant lady eating like 2 bowls of pudding. Um, went to bed. Yeah. And then the next day, his movements slowed down quite a bit again to the point where he had almost stopped moving, which really just reminded me of Lillian's last hours. So after we
Yeah.
put the big boys to bed, Mark came with me that time to the hospital. So I was exactly 25 weeks pregnant. They decided that night to do a biophysical profile just because that gives, more detailed information on the baby. It's basically an ultrasound, but they count baby's breaths and baby's movements and everything.
Oh, wow.
And he failed that first biophysical profile. So at that point, they said, at the bare minimum, you're going to be staying here in the hospital for several days so we can monitor him, but we're going to give you some IV fluids and then repeat the biophysical profile again. So I got my fluids for about an hour. They came back and did the BPP again, and he failed a second time. So at that point, it was like everybody came into the triage room and were like, you are going to have an emergency C-section right now because your baby is in distress. We've spoken with your maternal fetal medicine specialist, and he wants to get baby out of there and get baby safe. I even asked if I could pee, and they said, no, we don't even have time for you to do that. You need to get to the OR now.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So that was kind of our first, like, okay, something's up. Like, this shouldn't be happening at 25 weeks pregnant. But we didn't really have any more information than that. And as I was being prepped for my C-section, I kind of, was just going through like my internal Rolodex, thinking of other moms I knew who'd had micro preemies or super small preemies. And, they were placing the spinal block. I kept telling myself, okay, micro preemie, his lungs will probably be his biggest issue. That's going to be like the main hurdle we have to get over, which was true to an extent, just given the fact that he is still on oxygen a lot of the time. But I think it also showed just how uninitiated I was into things that can go wrong during pregnancy or other comorbidities that come with prematurity. So he was born at 9:48 p.m. that night. They took him to the resuscitation room and got him intubated and all that. I got to see him in my postpartum recovery room. They brought him in the big neonatal transport unit before they took him down a few blocks to the higher level NICU. And I sent Mark to go with him. I was like, if things are going wrong and he starts taking a course towards death, I want at least one of us to be there with him. So I just kind of shoved Mark out of the room, basically, from my hospital bed. And then I had my nice little opioid-induced sleep for that night. Yes. And then the next morning, the phone in my hospital room rang, and the phone was in such a place that I could not reach it. So I had to like grab onto the bed rails of my hospital bed and kind of scooch my post C-section self over to try and reach the phone, which was incredibly painful. So I picked it up and I kind of like grunted hello on the phone. And it was the neonatologist who had delivered Gilbert, and he at that time finally told me that, hey, we just did a head ultrasound on Gilbert because he had a horrible night just in terms of respiratory needs and whatnot, and we found that he has brain bleeds, intraventricular hemorrhages, and it's a grade 4 on the right, which is the worst possible, and a grade 3 on the left. So that was the first time that I'd heard anything about his brain injury. And I think I asked the doctor, I was like, okay, can you put like a tap into his brain or something to draw the blood out? And that's when he said, unfortunately, there is no treatment for this aside from giving him blood transfusions and platelets to basically, keep blood in his body since he's actively bleeding, and then platelets to try and slow the bleed down as much as we can. It was later that afternoon, once they transferred me over to the bigger hospital to my recovery, that they told us, hey, we actually saw these bleeds on his biophysical profile. So they occurred in utero. And that occurs in about 1 in every 10,000 babies. So I guess that would be probably what makes him the most rare, is just how uncommon those in utero bleeds are.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. What was that like to find out initially, like when he first told you that?
Initially. initially I was in shock. It just seemed so unfair that we'd already had a baby who had died, and now we were given these horrible life expectancy statistics and stuff for another baby. I couldn't believe that it was possibly happening again.
Yeah.
I think that's what was hardest for me.
Yeah. What were they telling you life expectancy wise right then?
Right then they were saying, we have no way of knowing if he's going to survive these bleeds. It could be days, it could be weeks. We were even given the option to pull his life support and switch him to comfort care just because of severity and perceived low quality of life. But throughout his stay, we were told multiple times not to expect him to survive childhood. And there's some data out there that says some of these kids don't live past their early 20s. Some of them live a full life. So we really don't know.
Okay. But with Lillian, you have that experience of losing a child already. And so you have this looming possibility that probably is really hard.
Exactly. I mean, we have that firsthand experience of how fragile life is. And then, we're not insulated from death anymore. We know what happens after your child dies. You have to make those burial versus cremation decisions. And, even beyond that, just the lifetime of grief and the depth of grief that we've learned that follows that.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So what was his NICU experience like for you guys?
It was long. That's probably the best way I can describe it. It was not the happy NICU experience where, it's kind of believed that babies are there just to grow and get bigger and catch up. Like I just kind of touched on, a lot of it was basically, are you sure you guys are committed to caring for him the rest of his life? And all those life support conversations, those happened every few months while he was there, even as recently as a month before his homecoming from the NICU. We were still given the option to switch him to comfort care. Aside from that, like medically, he had a heart surgery to close a vessel that usually closes on its own after birth. His didn't. He had 4 eye surgeries to correct his retinopathy of prematurity. And, kind of now Mark and I like dark humor joke that were those surgeries even worth it since he can't see?
Yeah. Oh.
Those were always like just a huge pain for him to recover from. One of the cascading effects of brain bleeds is that the brain can swell and babies can develop hydrocephalus afterwards. So when he was about 4 months old, he had his first brain surgery to receive the pressure. He didn't have a shunt placed at that time. Instead, it was an endoscopic third ventriculostomy and choroid plexus cauterization. So they basically punched a hole between the third and fourth ventricles of his brain to allow cerebrospinal fluid to circulate. And then they also cauterized some of the structures in the brain that produce cerebrospinal fluid.
Wow.
So that was kind of our first attempt to control his swelling.
He was 3 months old.
4 months old.
4 months old.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, his stay was a lot of respiratory stuff. He was intubated and extubated over 6 times. And we were on a really rapid course towards him needing a tracheostomy. But then after that brain surgery and the swelling was initially relieved, his respiratory status improved to the point that he was able to come home just with a nasal cannula for oxygen.
Wow. And what was your experience emotionally during his NICU stay? Like when specifically too, like when they kept asking you about life support, talking about his quality of life, like what was that like?
I was mad. I would say his NICU stay was characterized by a lot of anger for me, and I'm not an angry person. Like it was a very foreign emotion for me. We didn't argue with the doctors, but we definitely took our stand, saying like, are you guys remembering that we've done this death thing before? We would so much rather do special needs. That's, it's hard, but it's, to us, it would be so much easier than having another child die.
Yeah, like it's not the easy way out.
No,
right?
No.
So since you have been through some really hard, negative things in your life at a young age, right? Like these are hard things. I wonder, when hard things happen, and maybe not even related to your children, maybe related, but just hard things in general, as they come up, do you feel like you face them differently than you would have before Lillian and Ghillie?
Yes, they don't really seem hard at all anymore. If it's related to the other kids, like them throwing a tantrum in public now, I would be like, whatever.
Yeah.
Just do your thing. Don't mind the people staring.
That's awesome.
Yes, it has totally changed like my perspective, and I guess threshold for dealing with a lot of things in life. They just don't seem like as big a deal at all right now.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. How has your view of yourself changed because of Gilbert?
I think I've really finally found my advocacy voice. Growing up, I was the very, very shy, timid person. I would never raise my hand to answer questions in class. I didn't talk to a whole lot of people, but then since Lillian's death and Gilbert's NICU experience and everything that he faces now, I think I've really found my voice and realized that, my voice is one that's worth other people hearing.
Yeah. In what ways have you done that?
I would say that some of the bigger ones are, standing up to doctors when their decision doesn't align with what we've heard from other specialties, or just our gut instinct, kind of like you touched on earlier. And then even with strangers who see him out and about, granted, he hasn't left the house to go to a doctor's appointment since November.
Wow.
But we do see strangers when he's downtown at appointments who stare and make comments, or even take pity on him. And I've really kind of found my voice in addressing that too, and calling them out and saying, that's really not okay for you to say things like that or stare at him like that.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you had an Instagram post about inclusion and the pitying comments and stares, like you were talking about, that those are not inclusive. For any listeners who don't have experience with having a special needs child, what is your advice? Like things to say instead of, other things not to say.
Yeah. Things to say. My biggest piece of advice is just approach him like you would any other child. He might not see you, he might not respond to you, but just giving him that benefit of being treated like everyone else is so important for us. And it's also really important for him, just as he grows up and potentially gains awareness of the things people are saying and doing around him. And he loves to be talked to also. So I think any opportunity to talk to a special needs person is huge. It can even be as simple as complimenting their shoes or something.
Something like, instead of focusing on all the differences, right? Like, he has oxygen. What are some things that people have said that have been less than helpful?
We get a lot of, oh, poor baby, when he's out at appointments, just because they see the oxygen. Sometimes he's hooked up to his feeding pump, so they see that as well. Or even if I have to stop and suction him, that one gets a lot of stares. And oh, poor baby. The other one I get a lot is, what's wrong with him? And I know it stems from people's kind of natural curiosity, But, the truth is he has medical issues, he has health issues, he has developmental issues, but there is nothing at his core that's wrong with him. I think it would be much more helpful for someone to ask, like, what does he need oxygen for? Why isn't he making eye contact? I'm always happy to help answer questions and explain things, because I think that's part of what can break down stigma. But saying things like, what's wrong with him, is just really not helpful. It's kind of gross.
Yeah, because personalizes it to him. Like something's wrong with
Yeah.
him. Like nothing's wrong with him.
Mm-hmm.
His body has
No.
struggles, but he's perfect.
Yes, he is.
Yeah, I really like that. And to wrap up, one last question. What has been a more difficult side of Gilbert's diagnosis, and a positive moment? And it may not even be from his diagnosis, maybe even despite of.
Yeah.
Some memorable times throughout his life.
Yes, I would say one of the hardest things, a lot of his diagnoses have happened since his discharge from the NICU, just since this is kind of a slowly emerging or evolving brain injury. But, each diagnosis that we've gotten over the last 6 months to a year has kind of been like a check in the box that they told us to expect when they first told us that his brain was injured. And it's really hard to have those small amounts of optimism and hope that you just hang on to, thinking, oh my gosh, maybe my kid will be the one to beat the odds, and they'll be able to walk and talk and see and interact with their peers. But then all of that is crushed with every new diagnosis we're given. I think it just goes to show that, everyone wants their kid to beat the odds, but that being on the good side of the statistics still isn't a guarantee. I think just coming to that realization that, oh yeah, this is as bad as they said it could be, has been really hard. But then on the other side, his most triumphant and joyful moments, which I could fill a book with those, because he has so many in any given day. I always go back to his first Christmas this past year and just watching him look at the lights on the Christmas tree, and to have something in his environment that he could see and see so well was huge for us. And he loved laying underneath the Christmas tree and just looking up at the lights. And that's a memory that I always go back to, especially on his harder days.
Love that. That's so sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Anna, for sharing your story and sharing your heart with us today.
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity to share him. He definitely has quite the story to tell.
As usual, you can head to the website, therarelifepodcast.com, for photos of Anna, Ghillie, and their adorable family. There is a link in the show notes for the Flintstones hearing loss simulation video that I mentioned in the episode, as well as a link for more information about the service BetterHelp and Anna's Instagram account, if you're interested in following that. Next week's episode is Anna's special topic, all about compound grief, as she shares more about Lillian's death and how that affects her parenting of Gilbert and her day-to-day life. See you then.